In this training session, we're going to take a look at filter chaining. What filter chaining allows us to do is determine when events happen in succession or within a certain time period. So up until now, we've only looked at events in isolation, meaning that we could certainly detect if an event occurs, if a certain number of events occur. We can correlate events with collector side thresholds. But what if we want to detect a certain sequence of actions that can be traced through the event log? So for example, what if we can detect that a process is started and a network connection is opened, or a service is being stopped and a process is being started, or something is being created, like we could detect the creation of a scheduled task and the installation of a driver within a certain time period and then get alerted upon that. So the idea behind filter chaining is we want to detect if something happens within a certain time period, whereas each event in isolation is harmless, but a combination of these events within a certain time period is of concern, and we want to look at it. And we can even link these events together with the dynamic data inside the events. So in this example, so enough of the theory, in this example, what I set up is the ability to detect if somebody starts the command prompt and then launches a process from that command prompt. Now, again, this is just a theoretical example and not something you'd probably want to use in a production environment, but it's to illustrate that we could say we're okay with somebody opening the command prompt, but we don't want somebody launching processes out of there. This is definitely more of a security feature and more of an advanced scenario, but let's take a dive in here. So I already created a package here and I called it command prompt process launch. You'll notice that there's a little chain icon next to the package. So that indicates that this is a filter chaining package. If we expand it, we have two filters, just like always, except that these filters won't actually be called, won't actually notify any action. Instead, they're just used to detect what we're worried about happening happens. So how do we make a package a filter chaining package? Well, through properties, of course. There's a checkbox, chain filters in this package. And once we click that, we have two configuration settings. One, of course, is a timeout, meaning how much time can pass before we don't consider these events to be related, right? So if somebody launches a command prompt and then starts a process an hour later, then we won't be concerned about that. We are concerned if somebody opens a command prompt and immediately launches a process within a certain time period. I have 1 minute here, but we could also set this, let's just set it 5 seconds. Require sequence means that these events, these filters that we have set up here, have to happen in sequence. So first the command prompt has to start and then the child process has to be launched. There may be other situations where you don't care about the sequence, so you just want to see, okay, did all these things happen within a certain time period? So in that case, you would clear that sequence checkbox. So that's the first step. So now that we have the filter chaining set up, let's take a look at the first process here. Again, we're looking at regular filters, just like we always do. We're looking at security event, audit success, process creation 4688, and we're looking at cmd.exe. So new process name matches CMD. Okay, so this filter will match when we launch the command prompt. What happens next is we have another filter that again looks at processes, and you would think, well, that would match any process that's being created on the system. So this would always sort of come true. But if anybody just launches the command prompt, right? So if I just launch the command prompt, this filter will match. And then any process that starts on the system will automatically fulfill this filter chain. But that's not how it's going to work because of the chain settings. So if we click here, you'll notice that we have the ability to link these two events together with insertion strings. So here we're basically saying for this event, command prompt start, we are capturing the new process ID. So anytime we start a process, obviously we get a unique process ID for that system at that time. And then we're going to look at the other filter. Again, look at the chain settings. And here we're specifying the process ID and what that actually is. And if you look here, it's a little bit more obvious. It will be the creator process ID. Okay, so the naming in Windows is a bit off, a little confusing, but essentially what we're looking at here is we're looking at the creator process ID. So now we're linking these two events together. So that means only processes where the creator process ID matches this filter are going to match. So this means a child process, basically. We could even copy this filter and call it child process 1 and 2 and say, well, we only want to know if somebody launches 2 child processes, for example. If somebody's starting to do interesting things on the system, and we could say, well, we don't want our users to open the command prompt and certainly not launch any processes. But again, just trying to illustrate the functionality here. So we have 2 filters here. Both have to match within 5 seconds, and the insertion strings will have to match. So the creator process ID of this event will have to match the new process ID of this event. And that's how they're going to match. So we're going to save this and deploy it. As always, we're waiting for the 10:35 event. It is here. And now I'm going to open up the command prompt and immediately launch ping, which is a process in Windows. Doesn't matter what it is. You can't use anything that's built into the command line like a dir listing, because that's not actually launching a process. But the ping would work. And if we look here, we have the filter chain for event log package, command prompt, process launch is complete. And we actually have 2 of them. In this particular case, we don't have any more information here by these filters other than the process ID of the calling process, but we can use that in the web reports to do some more investigation. But it's really unnecessary, because at this point we're really just concerned, okay, did it happen? And it did. So what we would have to do then, well, what we could do then is we could save this process ID, A38, or we can go here into the web reports, simply go to process activity, and we're going to look for process cmd.exe. We're going to restrict ourselves to the EventSentry server, because that's where we're looking. We're going to restrict ourselves to the last 15 minutes because we just did this. We'll notice that there's a few command prompts launched. And indeed, there were 2 launched here within fast succession. And of course, if we take a look here, we have the process ID here, 2616. So that ran, and this is still running. So that is the one that we are probably using here. So that's valid. But there's another one here that doesn't really match what I was trying to demonstrate here. So this kind of snuck in there. So what I can do now is I have the process ID here, 14700. Now we can say, well, what did this process launch? So there we leave the computer in place. But now we're going to say, and creator process ID 14700. And we can see now that this process launched these 3 processes here. So this is probably a script that's running on that system, and we caught it. So it was just a pure coincidence that these 2 processes here happened while I was testing this. But this is how you would basically investigate this. So within within just a minute or so of work, you know exactly, okay, well, what has been launched on the system. Of course, since this is launched as a warning event, you would need to set up or make sure that you're actually getting warning events emailed to you, or right click, add include filter, and essentially, create a filter that emails you about this warning. What we've noticed here, of course, if you go back, and we can go back here in time and say, okay, we want to just see process CMD and computers EventSentry. We can see that there's a lot of processes launched by the computer account. So what we can do now is we can say, well, we only really care if a process is launched that is not launched by the computer account. And the way we do that is we go back here to the first filter. We will then create another condition, and we're talking about the username of this event. So that would be the target user SID. So we're going to have to check this though. So we're going to hit cancel here. We can go back here, look at this event, and we'll notice that the computer account is up here in the account name. So that's under creator subject account name. So we'll go back here, create a subject account name. That's insertion string number 2. So back here, subject username. And we're going to say we don't want it to end with $. So $$ would match any username that ends with $, but we can use the exclamation point to negate this. And we're going to set the chain using AND. So now it basically says, okay, if a process name matches cmd.exe and the subject username does not end with the $, that's when we want this to fire. So now deploy this again, and we'll make sure this still works. This time we have a 1036 event. That's okay too. I'm going to close this event, this window here. I'm going to launch ping again. If we refresh it, there it is again. Here we have the insertion string. Of course, this is written in hex, so you may have to convert that into decimal. But if you go back here now, we'll see that I launched this process. And if we use the Windows calculator and go into the programmer view, and we have a decimal PID of 14,940, we can convert this to hex and we get 3A5C. And this is from an earlier test where we're getting notified every time we open up the calculator. And there we are, 3A5C. So this is how we can correlate this. We can go back to the reporting and investigate exactly, okay, what happened here. So now we could go into the creator process ID and type in the 14,940. Of course, we have to remove the CMD because it's no longer CMD. We just want to have the creator process ID. And we can see that this is from earlier, and this didn't actually catch, but conhost is always started, so that can be ignored. But we can see here that ping.exe was launched. And again here, if considering that conhost is being launched, so if we close this here again, so this thing may need a little bit of tweaking, but if we just open up the command prompt here, let's close this, then we notice that this is immediately matched as well. So now we can go back and tweak this. And remember, we have the field new process name. So here we can go in, say new process name. And again, we can say conhost.exe star, but not. We don't want it to match conhost.exe because that's always launched when you launch the command prompt. I'm going to save and deploy this again. Can close this. So 1035 is our last event here. Just going to open up the command prompt now and see if we still create the chain, which we don't want to, in this case, to be created. And we only have to wait 5 seconds because that's the setting of our filter chain. Okay, so that worked. If I launch something now, it should also not match the chain because the 5 seconds have passed. I'm going to wait a few seconds. So we close this again. Now I'm going to open up the command prompt, immediately type ping, and we should see the chain matching immediately now. Again, we have the hex string of 860. So we can go back to hex 860. 2144 is in decimal. So now we can simply type this in, 2144. And con host can be ignored, but there's our ping process again that we launched. So this is how a filter chaining package works. Obviously, we went a little bit deeper here and we looked at some of the filtering conditions of filters as well. But I think it's a good exercise to understand how the filters work, how can we troubleshoot this and customize it. But there's a lot of applications for this. Like I said, detecting things in succession to potentially detect certain malware or malicious activity on a system.